Hi, I'm Ariana Bernstein, and I'm doing my project on the Target data breach of 2013. So I'm going to start with a Target background. So Target was founded initially as the Dayton Dry Goods Company in 1902 by George Draper Dayton in Minneapolis. The first Target store didn't actually open until 1962. Before then, they were just the Dayton Dry Goods stores, but it was their first Target store, and it was known as the discount store and supermarket, which is very much how it's still known today. And by 1989, it had expanded throughout the Midwest, Southeast, and the Pacific Northwest. And then the entire Dayton Dry Goods Company was renamed Target Corporation in 2000. By 2009, expansion had begun into all 50 states, and then eventually they also went into Canada, but they had decided to remove their locations in Canada and just stay stateside. And then in 2013 is when the breach was announced and when the breach happened, and obviously we'll get more into that as we go on. So before the breach, Target did have an existing security plan. They actually, 6 months before the breach happened, had just installed malware detection from FireEye. And basically what FireEye does is it creates a parallel network for incoming malware that stores all the malware on a separate network that looks like a parallel network, or that is a parallel network, and the hackers think that they're on the actual network, when in reality they're not. Target also had an entire computer security team in Bangalore, and they would contact HQ about any suspicions or anything tech related, security related that they were concerned about. So the type of breach that Target underwent, there was 3 different types of attack. So it was the Citadel Trojan, which is a phishing attack, Black POS for point of sale, which is a memory scraper that looks for credit card numbers and then steals them. Captoxa, which is a malware used on POS systems. So these are just the 3 kinds that were used throughout the breach on Target. So some companies that have similar attacks are listed here. I want to highlight PF Chang's and Home Depot because both of those companies also, the attacks were done using Black POS. And as you can see, this is a fair amount of large companies. So because of that, the Federal Reserve created a plan called the Strategies for Improving the U.S. Payment System in 2015 as a response to all these companies getting hacked because it was clearly a problem. People's credit cards and personal information was being stolen. So, okay, what actually happened with the Target breach? So it affected over 100 million customers, and they had stolen credit cards and personal information. So about 40 million card numbers were stolen, and 70 million accounts of personal information were stolen. So some of that was overlapping, but the data is kind of inconclusive of how much was actually overlapping. So the attack started just days before Thanksgiving of 2013. And that on the attacker's end was, very smart because Christmas was coming up. There was more shopping. They were able to make the attack happen before Black Friday and through the height of Christmas shopping. So a lot of credit cards are going through. They were able to take a lot of information. So Citadel, which is the malware package used via phishing, was used on Fazio Mechanical Services, which is Target's vendor for air conditioning and heating. So basically, the vendors that Target uses are all available online, and the attackers just went on, selected whichever one they wanted, and I guess they maybe had figured out that Fazio had, an easy way to access it, which I'll get into more later. And then they selected it, and through phishing, were able to access Fazio, and then because of that, they were able to get into Target's network. So the access to servers was gained, and an executable file was uploaded, and it looked exactly like any of the other Target's files. So it was worded the same, it looked exactly the same, so it wasn't suspicious. So the stolen information, the credit cards and the personal information, was saved in that folder on the Target server, and then it was moved to another Target server that allowed transfers out of the firewall, and then lastly, it was transferred to Russia. And all of this happened during business hours, again, to not seem suspicious. So hours of, 9 to 5 U.S. time, during business hours U.S. time. So some dates that were important. So the attack happened November 27th to December 15th. The FBI had found out about it and confronted Target on December 12th, but it took them 3 days to actually confirm that this breach was taking place. And then on December 19th, Target made a formal admittance saying that they were being hacked and that this was a serious situation. And then an apology letter was released on January 12th from the CEO, who later stepped down. So the data was retrieved, meaning the investigators were able to find out what data was taken because the hackers stored it on Target's dump server, so they were able to still see it. This was the largest multi-state data breach to date, 100 million customers, and it happened from the 27th to the 15th. So no arrests were made as of 2017. So as of then, this was a still open investigation. We don't know who the hackers were, where they are, other than that they were using a server in Russia. So Target was confident that PIN numbers connected to debit cards were not accessed because they were fully encrypted as well. So how did all of this happen? How does such a big company like Target have a huge hack that affects so many people? So there were warning signs, and they were missed due to security gaps. And as I mentioned before, they had just installed FireEye 6 months prior to the breach, but functionalities were shut off. And this happened because of unfamiliarity with the software and just missive training. People weren't trained in how to use this software, so they didn't know what they needed or what was important. So early discovery was missed because FireEye would have been able to see that there was a hack and would have sent warning signs. In fact, it did, even though some functionalities were turned off. So FireEye couldn't take all the malware itself, but it did give notifications to the team in Bangalore, and they ignored them and didn't report them to HQ. Why they had ignored them was because the FireEye notifications were sent in XML format, and so it's pretty difficult to read if you don't really know what XML is. And then, of course, the attack that went through Fazio, so it wasn't internal, so that wasn't really something that Target themselves could control. But Fazio was using a free version of malware protection that wasn't supposed to be used for companies. It was supposed to be used for residential customers. So that was obviously a big error as far as Fazio. And also Target, their sensitive information, where they store it from their customers, was not isolated. So it was not hidden anywhere. It was easily accessed. And the point of system terminals were not hardened, so they were not secure as they should have been. So obviously this has impacts on customers. Personal and financial information was stolen, and it was actually sold on the black market. This is really serious for identity theft and, people using credit cards. And then obviously it's just such an inconvenience. It was during the holiday season. Customers felt less secure about credit cards post-security breach. And this was found during a study that customers were, after hearing about the Target breach, whether they had been involved in it or not, they felt less secure about their credit card security. So replacement cards were needed to be purchased, which was another inconvenience as well as an added cost. So was overdraft fees. And then a lot of customers also bought credit monitoring services that was costly. But then after Target gave affected customers free credit services, and they opened this up to definitely affected customers and customers who thought they might be affected. So this also had impacts on banks. So it was a huge disruption in their workflow. All of the focus that was normally on their day-to-day activities and duties was now focused on the breach and trying to get customers their new debit cards, new credit cards, and trying to shut down all these credit cards that were being used by other people. So replacing debit and credit cards is a really big expense for banks, so they had to deal with all of that as well. So the impacts on the company, the impacts on Target include they needed to provide free credit screening to all affected, and obviously that was a really expensive thing to do. Greg Steinhafel, who was the CEO, he stepped down in May, and then Brian Cornell became the new CEO at the end of July. So 6 months after breach, Target dropped 7 cents in their shares, and they ended up spending $148 million in breach-related costs. Because of all of that, it also brought down sales, traffic, and revenue and profits, and it suffered for many, many months after the breach. So their post-breach security plan, they hired a new CIO, Bob DeRodes. They also came out with their chip-enabled red cards, which came along with all the new chip technology. So that's specific Target credit cards that are used only at Target, but they have their chip enabled. So the settlement also required advanced encryption policy, which is a good thing, but it's probably something Target would have done on their own anyways after this. But by law, they were required to advance their encryption policy. There was also a letter of apology by Greg Steinhafel that I mentioned before that he released before he stepped down. He released this in January, stepped down in May. And basically, he just apologizes and explains the steps that had been taken to recover the information and to help the customers. He explains that they sealed points of access, removed all the malware, and hired data experts to uncover how the attack happened and how it could have been avoided. So here are some of my personal recommendations. The administrators obviously needed to familiarize themselves with FireEye. They should not have turned off any functionalities, especially if they didn't know what they were used for or what they were supposed to do. FireEye should also not send notifications in XML, which makes it hard to read, which is, another study used user experience to determine how user experience can help with notifications. This specifically was about the notification that the Target breach had happened, but I think it also relates to FireEye, and that if you're sending something in XML that is really important, it might be missed, it might be looked over because it just looks like a bunch of code and people might not know what it means. So Target, if FireEye was not going to change that, they definitely should have had someone who can read and understand XML. And I would have assumed that someone on their security team would have anyways, having a tech background, but who knows? This I think is obviously the most important one, is information security training. It seemed like there obviously was a little bit of lack with information security training with the team in Bangalore for, not seeing the notifications, turning off some of the functionalities. And I mean, there's never such thing as too much training. And of course, Fazio needed better security. They should not have had a free malware software. And that's not necessarily something that is Target's fault, but with such a big company and dealing with such sensitive information, it is something that they should have double checked with all of their vendors. And then at the end, I just have my bibliography. Thank you.